The food industry never tells seniors this. After 60, some foods don't just add calories, they send aging signals to your heart, brain, and muscles. Doctors call it normal aging. Science says it's not. Let me show you the foods quietly pushing people toward weakness and dependency. Blood pressure is one of the first systems to lose resilience with age, yet it is also one of the most misunderstood. Many people think of it as a simple number on a cuff, something that rises or falls based on stress or genetics, but beneath that number is a far more delicate reality. After 60, blood vessels are no longer flexible rubber tubes. They are closer to aging pipes, less elastic, more fragile, and far more sensitive to what flows through them day after day. High-sodium packaged meals, canned soups with added salt, processed snacks like chips and crackers, and frequent restaurant or fast food meals all share a common trait. They flood the bloodstream with sodium in a way the aging body can no longer easily compensate for. Earlier in life, the kidneys and blood vessels could buffer these spikes. With age, that buffering system weakens. Sodium begins to linger, pulling water into the bloodstream, increasing pressure against vessel walls that are already stiffening with time. The real issue is not just the rise in blood pressure readings. Excess sodium accelerates vascular stiffness itself. It stresses the endothelium, the thin, delicate lining inside blood vessels that controls dilation and constriction. Over time, this stress promotes microdamage, inflammation, and reduced nitric oxide availability, making vessels less able to relax. Systolic pressure climbs, pulse pressure widens, and the heart is forced to work harder with every beat, even at rest. The process is slow enough to be deceptive. Someone can eat small portions, avoid overeating, and still experience worsening blood pressure because the type of food matters more than the quantity. This is why so many older adults feel confused when their numbers remain stubbornly high despite not eating much. The body isn't reacting to volume, it's reacting to repeated chemical signals that say, retain fluid and tighten vessels over and over again. A useful way to picture this is to imagine running water through old plumbing at maximum pressure every day. At first, nothing dramatic happens. Then, tiny cracks form. Eventually, the system weakens from the inside. Salt-heavy foods create that same internal strain. They don't cause immediate collapse. They cause cumulative stress that shows up years later as hypertension, heart strain, kidney burden, and increased stroke risk. This is why shifting toward fresh or minimally processed foods often produces results that medications alone struggle to achieve. When sodium intake drops below about 2,300 milligrams per day, or even lower for some individuals, the internal environment changes. Fluid balance stabilizes. Blood vessels regain some responsiveness. The heart no longer has to fight against constant resistance. Flavor doesn't disappear either. It simply comes from different sources. Herbs, garlic, lemon, and vinegar stimulate taste receptors without sending damaging signals to aging vessels. What's striking is how often blood pressure improves when this single pattern changes. Not because the body is fixed, but because it is no longer under constant assault. Aging doesn't mean the system stops responding. It means it responds more slowly, more delicately, and more honestly to what it's given. And when the daily sodium burden eases, the vascular system often takes that as permission to finally exhale. Energy problems after 60 are rarely about eating too little. They are far more often about eating foods that push blood sugar and insulin in directions the aging body can no longer stabilize. Sugary drinks and fruit juices, refined grains like white bread and pastries, ultra-processed snacks and desserts, and sweetened breakfast foods all share a hidden characteristic. They deliver glucose faster than older muscles can absorb it. What once felt energizing now quietly destabilizes metabolism. With age, muscle tissue becomes less responsive to insulin. This is not a personal failure. It is a biological shift. Muscle is the primary sink for blood sugar, and when it resists insulin, glucose lingers in the bloodstream longer. The pancreas responds by releasing more insulin, attempting to force that sugar into cells. Over time, this repeated surge worsens insulin resistance, promotes fat storage, especially around the abdomen, and accelerates the loss of lean muscle, a process known as sarcopenia. The fatigue that follows is often misunderstood. Blood sugar spikes create temporary energy, but the crash that follows is sharper in older adults. Hunger returns quickly, mental clarity drops, and the body signals for more fast carbohydrates. This creates a metabolic loop that feels like constant low energy despite frequent eating. The engine is revving, but the power isn't translating to forward movement. The internal stress is substantial. Elevated insulin interferes with fat burning and increases inflammatory signaling. High glucose damages proteins and blood vessels through glycation, stiffening tissues that already struggle with elasticity. Muscle breakdown accelerates because insulin resistance reduces the anabolic signals needed to preserve strength. The result is a body that gains fat while losing muscle, even when calorie intake hasn't increased dramatically. An effective way to visualize this is to imagine repeatedly flooring the gas pedal while the transmission slips. The engine gets louder, hotter, and more worn, yet the car doesn't move smoothly. Refined carbohydrates act in the same way. They demand rapid metabolic responses that the aging system cannot deliver efficiently anymore. The damage is not explosive, it is cumulative. Stability changes the entire picture. When carbohydrates arrive more slowly, accompanied by protein and fiber, glucose enters the bloodstream at a manageable pace. Whole grains, legumes, and vegetables behave very differently from refined flour and sugar, even when the carbohydrate count appears similar. Protein provides structural support for muscle, while fiber buffers absorption and feeds gut bacteria that improve insulin sensitivity over time. This shift doesn't just affect blood sugar readings, it influences appetite, body composition, strength, and even cognitive clarity. Many people are surprised by how much steadier they feel when these accelerators are reduced, not because food becomes restrictive, but because the body is no longer being forced into metabolic overdrive. Aging metabolism doesn't need constant stimulation. It needs consistency, pacing, and signals that align with its changing capacity. Subscribe to protect your strength, clarity, and independence. Some foods exert their damage not through immediate discomfort, but through quiet cumulative pressure that builds year after year. Trans fat-containing foods, processed meats such as bacon, sausage, and deli meats, and excess alcohol fall squarely into this category. They rarely trigger a clear warning signal in the moment, which is why they become embedded into daily routines for decades. The problem is that aging changes the body's tolerance for these exposures. What once passed through with little consequence now leaves a deeper biological footprint. Trans fats are among the most disruptive substances still present in modern diets. They distort cholesterol transport in a particularly harmful way, increasing small, dense LDL particles while suppressing protective HDL. This imbalance promotes plaque formation inside blood vessels that are already stiffening with age. At the same time, trans fats amplify systemic inflammation, activating immune pathways that place constant stress on arteries, joints, and metabolic tissues. In an older body, where cellular repair and antioxidant defenses are slower, this inflammatory signal lingers longer and does more damage before it is resolved. Processed meats introduce a different but equally concerning set of challenges. These foods contain preservatives and compounds formed during curing and smoking that interact with gut bacteria and intestinal lining. Over time, they increase oxidative stress and DNA damage in the colon, which helps explain the consistent association with higher colorectal cancer risk. Aging tissues divide more slowly, meaning damaged cells persist longer before being replaced. This extended exposure window allows small injuries to accumulate, quietly increasing long-term risk without producing early symptoms. Alcohol's role becomes more complex with age. The liver metabolizes alcohol more slowly, allowing it to circulate longer in the bloodstream and exert stronger effects on the brain and nervous system. Balance, coordination, and reaction time are all subtly impaired, raising fall risk even at amounts that once felt benign. Sleep architecture also changes. Alcohol fragments deep sleep and suppresses restorative REM cycles, undermining memory consolidation, hormone regulation, and muscle repair. Over time, this sleep disruption contributes to fatigue, insulin resistance, and cognitive decline. What ties these foods together is not a single mechanism, but their ability to magnify existing vulnerabilities. Aging already brings reduced vascular elasticity, slower detoxification, and heightened sensitivity to inflammation. Trans fats, processed meats, and alcohol act like accelerants poured onto a low-burning fire. They do not ignite it, but they cause it to spread more quickly and burn hotter beneath the surface. The mechanical analogy is useful here. Imagine a complex machine operating with slightly worn parts. Introducing fine sand does not cause immediate failure. Instead, it increases friction at every contact point. Efficiency drops, heat rises, and wear accelerates across the entire system. These foods function in much the same way. They increase friction in metabolic pathways, vascular function, immune signaling, and neurological processes, slowly eroding resilience. When these exposures are reduced, the body often demonstrates an unexpected capacity to stabilize. Inflammatory markers tend to soften. Cholesterol patterns improve. Digestive stress decreases. Sleep becomes deeper and more restorative. Balance and clarity often return to levels people thought were permanently lost. These changes are not dramatic because the damage was never dramatic to begin with. It was gradual, layered, and cumulative. The deeper lesson is that aging is shaped less by dramatic events than by chronic background signals. Long-term risk multipliers quietly influence the slope of decline. Reducing their presence doesn't make the body young again, but it does remove unnecessary resistance. And when that resistance fades, aging becomes less harsh, less accelerated, and far more manageable over time. By now, a clear thread should be emerging. Aging is not dictated by one bad meal or one indulgent season of life. It is shaped by patterns that repeat quietly over time. After 60, the body becomes less tolerant of constant stress and far more honest in how it responds to what it's given. Systems that once compensated in silence, blood vessels, muscles, metabolism, the brain, begin to reflect those signals more visibly. This is not a failure of the body. It is a narrowing of the margin for error. What long-lived populations have consistently shown, a point emphasized by researchers like Dan Buettner, is that longevity does not come from restriction or fear. It comes from repetition of protective patterns. Foods that reduce inflammation, stabilize blood sugar, support blood vessels, and preserve muscle appear again and again. Harmful foods are not eliminated entirely, but they lose their central role. They move from being daily signals to occasional ones. Seen this way, the foods discussed throughout this video are not moral failures or forbidden indulgences. They are simply mismatched to the biology of aging when consumed too often. High sodium strains stiffening vessels. Refined carbohydrates overwhelm insulin-resistant muscle. Trans fats, processed meats, and alcohol add friction to systems already working harder than they used to. When these foods dominate, the body is forced into a constant state of compensation, and compensation always carries a cost. When they are reduced, something important shifts. The body stops fighting a biochemical headwind. Blood pressure becomes more stable, not because aging stops, but because vessels are no longer being pushed to their limits. Energy steadies as glucose swings soften. Muscle loss slows when insulin and inflammation calm down. Sleep deepens when the nervous system isn't repeatedly disrupted. These changes may feel subtle at first, but their impact compounds over time. One of the most damaging myths about aging is the belief that adaptation ends at a certain age. In reality, the body remains responsive well into later decades. What changes is speed, not capability. When harmful signals are lowered and supportive ones become consistent, the body still recalibrates. It still seeks balance. It still protects what it can. Aging does not mean the system is broken. It means it requires clearer, more compatible inputs. This is where the idea of independence becomes central. Independence is not preserved by dramatic interventions or last-minute corrections. It is built quietly, through stable blood pressure that protects the brain, controlled blood sugar that preserves nerves and vision, strong muscles that prevent falls, and restorative sleep that keeps cognition intact. These outcomes are not accidental. They are the downstream result of daily patterns that reduce unnecessary strain. Healthy aging, then, is not about chasing youth or perfection. It is about reducing friction. When friction is lowered, the body has room to function closer to its design, even as it changes with time. The goal is not to eat less or fear food, but to align food choices with how the body actually works after 60. When that alignment happens, aging feels less like a battle and more like a steady process that can be navigated with clarity. Years are not just added to life. Life remains present, functional, and meaningful within those years. And that ultimately is what protecting the pillars of healthy aging is really about.